I knew what would happen the moment I agreed to visit his family. The polite smiles that wouldn't reach their eyes. The sharp glances that would dissect every inch of me. The questions wrapped in silk, but sharpened like knives. I wore a simple beige dress, flat shoes, no jewelry, not because I couldn't afford better, but because I needed to see the truth. Tonight wasn't about impressing anyone, it was about finding out who would stand beside me when I looked like I had nothing. And whether Min-jae, the man I loved, would finally choose me. Welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, welcome. We tell stories that hit home, stories about real people facing impossible choices. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from, and if you're enjoying this, don't forget to subscribe. It helps us keep bringing you these stories every week. The Han family estate sat on a hill overlooking the city. The gates were taller than most houses Ji-won had lived in growing up. She watched through the car window as iron bars slid open, revealing a winding driveway lined with manicured hedges. Min-jae adjusted his tailored jacket as the car rolled forward. His fingers moved with practiced precision, straightening cufflinks that didn't need straightening. Everything about him was always perfect. Polished, precise, controlled. "You're quiet," he said casually, glancing at her. "Nervous?" Ji-won smiled softly. "A little." That was a lie. She wasn't nervous. She was tired. Tired of the sideways comments from his colleagues at company dinners. Tired of the way his mother looked at her like she was a stain on expensive fabric. Tired of how Min-jae always promised, "Just ignore them, they'll come around." As if her dignity was something she could set aside and pick up later when it was convenient. The car stopped in front of marble steps that swept upward to doors carved from dark wood. A butler descended to open her door. She stepped out, feeling the weight of eyes from windows above. The front doors opened before they reached them. His mother, Madame Han, stood framed in the entrance like a portrait, elegant in a silk hanbok the color of winter plums. Her hair swept back in a perfect chignon, her expression as cool as the autumn air. She barely glanced at Ji-won before turning to her son. "You didn't tell us she dressed like this," she said. Her eyes lingered on Ji-won's flat shoes, cataloging every simple seam of her beige dress. Ji-won bowed politely, deeply, correctly. "Thank you for inviting me," no one replied. The silence stretched like a test she had already failed. Min-jae cleared his throat and placed a hand on the small of her back, guiding her inside. The marble entrance hall echoed with their footsteps. Hers soft and almost apologetic, his confident. His mother's heels clicking away toward the dining room. Ji-won noticed the paintings on the walls, the vases that were probably older than her grandmother, the chandelier that scattered light like broken diamonds. She noticed everything, and she noticed how no one offered to take her coat, how no one asked if she needed anything, how she had been invited yet remained, somehow, an intruder. Dinner was long, painfully long. The dining table could have seated 20, but tonight only 8 chairs were filled. Ji-won sat across from Min-jae's younger sister, Hye-jin, who kept staring at her with barely concealed curiosity, the way one might examine an unusual insect. Min-jae's father sat at the head of the table, silent except when speaking about business. 2 uncles rounded out the gathering, their wives whispering to each other while casting glances in Ji-won's direction. The food was exquisite, courses that arrived and departed with balletic precision. Each dish a work of art that Ji-won barely tasted. They asked Ji-won where she grew up. "Incheon," she said, "near the port." Soft laughter rippled around the table. "The Port District," one of the uncles repeated, as if she'd said something charmingly quaint. "Very working class, isn't it?" They asked about her parents. "My mother works at a textile factory. My father passed when I was 16. The table went silent. But it wasn't the respectful silence of condolence. It was the silence of confirmation. She was exactly what they'd suspected. Poor, unfortunate, unsuitable. They asked what she did for work. "I'm in finance," Ji-won said simply. Madame Han smiled thinly, setting down her chopsticks with deliberate care. "Finance can mean many things," she said. "Clerks, assistants, even tellers." Ji-won nodded. "Yes, many things." She watched Min-jae from the corner of her eye. He stared at his plate, pushing beef around in circles, his jaw tight. She waited. For him to speak, for him to correct them, for him to say, "That's enough." He didn't. His younger sister leaned forward over the table. her eyes bright with the cruelty of someone who'd never been on the receiving end of it. Appa, when you marry her, will she even know how to host guests? She laughed lightly. I mean, what do people from Incheon know about entertaining? Laughter followed. Light, musical, devastating. Ji-won felt something inside her finally go still, like a flame that stops flickering and simply burns steady before going out. This was the silence she had been listening for. Not the cruel words. She had expected those. But Min-jae's silence, his acceptance, his cowardice dressed up as politeness. She picked up her water glass and took a small sip, her hand perfectly steady. I'm sure I can learn, she said softly, if it matters. The if hung in the air. No one seemed to notice it except Madame Han, whose eyes narrowed slightly. The dinner continued. More courses, more questions disguised as conversation, more silence from the man who claimed to love her. When dessert finally arrived, Ji-won had made her decision. She just needed to be certain. One final test. After dinner, Madame Han stood gracefully. Ji-won, would you join me in the sitting room? It wasn't a question. Min-jae looked up. Mother, maybe we should all. Just the two of us, Madame Han said, her smile sharp. Woman to woman. Ji-won rose from her chair. Of course. She followed Min-jae's mother down a hallway lined with family portraits. Generations of Hans staring down with the same expression of superiority. The sitting room was smaller than the dining hall, but somehow more imposing. Silk wallpaper, antique furniture, photographs of Han family generations lining the walls like a genealogy of superiority. Madame Han poured tea from a porcelain pot so delicate it seemed to glow. She filled only one cup. Her own. You're a pretty girl, Madame Han said, settling into a chair. She arranged her handbook with meticulous precision. But love is not enough in this family. Ji-won stood. She hadn't been offered a seat. Min-jae is my eldest son, Madame Han continued. He will inherit everything, the company, the properties, the responsibilities. She took a sip of tea, eyes never leaving Ji-won's face. His wife will represent this family at every turn. Do you understand the weight of that? Yes, Ji-won said quietly. I don't think you do. The older woman's voice was soft but cut like wire. You will always be behind him. People like you should be grateful just to marry up. But gratitude isn't the same as belonging. You can be his wife, but you'll never be one of us. Ji-won bowed again, deeply. I understand. That answer surprised Madame Han. Her eyebrows lifted fractionally. She had expected tears, surely. Begging, perhaps. Shame, definitely. Instead, Ji-won looked calm, still, like a lake before dawn. You're taking this better than I expected, Madame Han said slowly. You've been very clear, Ji-won replied. I appreciate your honesty. Outside the room, near enough to hear everything, Min-jae stood with his hand raised to knock. He had been there for 3 minutes. He heard his mother's words, heard Ji-won's quiet responses. And he said nothing. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend. He simply stood there, frozen between two worlds, unable to choose. That was the moment Ji-won knew. Not when his sister mocked her, not when his mother judged her, but when Min-jae, the man who claimed to love her, stood silent on the other side of a door, listening to her being dissected like something less than human. When Ji-won emerged from the sitting room moments later, she found him standing there. Their eyes met. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked away. Shall we take a walk? Ji-won suggested. Her voice was gentle. I'd like some air. Min-jae nodded quickly, relief washing over his face. Yes, good idea. They walked through the house in silence, past the dining room where his family still sat, past the entrance hall with its judgmental portraits, out into the garden where the autumn air bit at Ji-won's bare arms. The garden was vast, illuminated by subtle lights along stone pathways that wound through perfectly sculpted trees and bushes. A koi pond reflected the moon like a mirror. It was beautiful in the way that expensive things always were. Impressive, but cold. They walked in silence for a while, their footsteps crunching on gravel. Do you think they'll ever accept me? Ji-won asked quietly. She watched the koi glide beneath the water's surface. Min-jae hesitated. His hands were in his pockets, his shoulders tense. They're traditional. It takes time for them to warm up to new people. You just need to be patient, Ji-won finished. Give them time? Prove myself. Well, yes. She nodded slowly, still watching the koi. There was a large white one with red markings that kept circling, never quite finding what it was looking for. What about you? She asked. What do you think? I think, he exhaled. I think they'll come around eventually. And if they don't, we'll manage. We don't need their approval to be happy, don't we? Ji-won turned to face him. Min-jae, your mother just told me I'll never belong. Your sister mocked me in front of your entire family. And you said nothing. His face tightened. I didn't want to make things worse. Worse for whom? Her voice was still quiet, but something in it made him step back. Worse for me? Or worse for you? He ran a hand through his hair, frustration finally breaking through his composure. What do you want me to do, Ji-won? Start a fight with my family on your first visit? Make everyone uncomfortable? I wanted to laugh. Make everyone uncomfortable, as if I hadn't spent the entire evening being carved apart while smiling politely, as if my comfort had ever been a consideration. I want you to choose me, I said. The words fell between us like stones. Not after they approve. Not when it's convenient. Now, when it's hard. If you're feeling this moment, take a second and hit that subscribe button. It really helps us continue bringing you stories like this. Min-jae looked at her then. Really looked at her. For a moment, she thought she saw something shift in his expression. Recognition? Maybe. Regret. But then he said, You're being unfair. You knew what my family was like. I told you they were traditional. Traditional, Ji-won repeated softly. That's your answer. It wasn't a question. She reached up and gently removed the engagement ring from her finger. The diamond caught the moonlight, sending tiny rainbows across her palm. It was beautiful, a perfect stone in a perfect setting. She had admired it when he first proposed 6 months ago. In a restaurant so expensive they didn't list prices on the menu. Min-jae frowned. What are you doing? Testing something, she said. She placed the ring in his hand and closed his fingers around it. For the last time. Ji-won, I'm testing whether love is enough, she said. Whether you'll fight for me, whether you'll stand with me even when everyone around you says I'm not good enough. She looked up at the mansion, lights glowing in every window, a monument to wealth and legacy and everything that mattered to his family. This was my final test, Min-jae. Not for your family, for you. And? His voice cracked slightly. Ji-won smiled, but it was sad. The smile of someone saying goodbye to a dream. You failed. She turned and started walking toward the driveway. Min-jae stood frozen, the ring cutting into his palm. Ji-won, wait. But his feet didn't move. His voice carried no conviction. She didn't look back. I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, my flat shoes making soft sounds against the gravel. The same shoes his mother had judged the moment I arrived. Behind me, I heard nothing. No footsteps chasing after me, no desperate calls. Just silence. The answer I'd been waiting for all night. The walk down the driveway felt longer than the drive up had been. Each step took her further from the life she'd almost chosen. The guards at the gate noticed her approaching. One of them stepped forward, concern on his face. Miss, do you need us to call a car? Ji-won smiled at him. It was the first genuine smile she'd managed all evening. No, thank you, she said. I'll be fine. They bowed to her as she passed through the gates. Their respect more genuine than anything she'd received inside those walls. She walked past the iron gates that had seemed so imposing just hours ago. Now they were just metal bars, nothing more. Behind her, somewhere in that enormous house, Min-jae stood at a window. He watched her figure grow smaller in the distance. He held the ring in his fist, tight enough to hurt. He wanted to run after her. He wanted to tell his family they were wrong. He wanted to be the man she deserved. But wanting wasn't the same as doing. So he stood there, and he watched her disappear into the darkness beyond the gates. And he did nothing. His mother appeared beside him. She'll come back, Madame Han said confidently. Girls like that always do. Min-jae didn't answer. Something told him she was wrong. Ji-won called for a taxi once she was far enough away. She stood under a streetlight, the cool October air raising goosebumps on her arms, and for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. The taxi arrived within minutes. She gave the driver her address, the small apartment Min-jae had always said she should give up once they married, the one that was beneath her future status. The driver made small talk about the weather. Ji-won responded politely, watching the city lights blur past her window. She went home, made tea in her cramped kitchen, sat on her worn couch, and stared at the wall until sunrise. She didn't cry. She had done enough crying for a man who wouldn't fight for her. The next morning, the Han family woke to chaos. It started with a phone call at 6:47 a.m. Chairman Han answered groggily, then sat bolt upright in bed. Another call came at 7:03. By 7:30, his phone was ringing continuously. His face had gone the color of old paper. Madame Han watched from across their bedroom, alarm growing. "What's happening?" He didn't answer, just stared at his phone as message after message flooded in. Their largest investor had withdrawn. Not reduced investment. Pulled out completely. A merger that had been 3 years in the making collapsed overnight. The other company cited concerns about Han Corporation's financial stability and leadership. By 9 a.m., emergency meetings were being called. Chairman Han's assistant arrived at the estate, carrying folders thick with documents, each one worse than the last. By 10 a.m., board members were demanding explanations. The phones wouldn't stop ringing. By 11 a.m., journalists were gathering outside Han Corporation headquarters. Like vultures sensing death, Min-jae sat in the dining room where they'd eaten dinner the night before, the same table where his sister had mocked Ji-won, now covered in financial reports and legal notices. His father burst in, throwing a document on the table. "Did you know about this?" Min-jae picked it up, scanning the text. His hands began to shake. At the bottom of every official notice, every withdrawal letter, every canceled contract was a name. A name none of them had bothered to research. Seo Ji-won, CEO. Seo Capital Management Majority Shareholder. JW Holdings. Sole Decision Authority, Incheon Port Development Trust. Madame Han stared at the documents spread across the dining table. The same table where, just 12 hours ago, she had mocked this woman for growing up near the port. "This can't be right," she whispered, but it was. Min-jae read through the documents with growing horror. Seo Ji-won controlled 40% of Han Corporation's investment capital. She sat on the boards of 3 of their major partners. Her companies held liens on 2 of their properties. She had been their safety net, their silent benefactor, their invisible supporter for the past 2 years. And they had never known. "The quiet girl in the plain dress," Madame Han said faintly. Min-jae stood in his father's study, feeling something cold settle in his stomach. "Did you know?" his father demanded. His voice was dangerous. "No," Min-jae's voice came out hoarse. She said she worked in finance. I thought she meant, you thought she was a secretary," his mother finished, her voice hollow. "We all did." Hyejin appeared in the doorway, her earlier smugness completely gone. "What's going to happen to us?" No one answered her. An emergency meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m., attendance mandatory. Location, Han Corporation main conference room. The family arrived separately, each lost in their own thoughts. The conference room felt like a tomb. Board members shuffled in like mourners at a funeral. Chairman Han sat at the head of the table. Madame Han beside him, their children flanking them. The atmosphere was suffocating. Everyone avoided eye contact. Whispers died the moment they started. At 1:58 p.m., the room fell completely silent. Everyone stared at the door, waiting. When the clock struck 2, the door opened. Ji-won walked in, this time in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than the dress she'd worn last night. Her hair was swept back, her bearing completely transformed. She looked like what she was, powerful, confident, unbowed. She wasn't the girl who had stood quietly while they mocked her. She was the woman who controlled their future. Madame Han's teacup trembled in its saucer. The sound echoed in the silent room. Ji-won walked to the opposite end of the table. She didn't sit. She stood, looking at each of them in turn. Min-jae stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. The sound made everyone flinch. Ji-won, why didn't you tell me? His voice broke on her name. She looked at him then. Not angry, not sad, just clear. Like someone who had already made peace with a difficult decision. I wanted to know who you were when I had nothing. The words fell into silence. No one moved. No one breathed. She turned to address the room, her voice steady and professional. For the past 2 years, I've supported Han Corporation's growth through strategic investments and partnerships. I believed in your company's potential, but belief requires more than financial returns. It requires shared values. She placed a folder on the table. These are the terms of my withdrawal. Everything is legally documented. You'll have 90 days to secure alternative financing. I'm not trying to destroy you. I'm simply removing myself. Chairman Han found his voice. This will cost us millions. Our stock will plummet. Why would you? Because some things matter more than money, Ji-won said simply. She looked at Madame Han. The older woman couldn't meet her eyes. You were right about one thing. Love isn't enough in your family. But not for the reason you think. She turned to the family, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. You failed the test. Then back to Min-jae. And so did you. She walked to the door, then paused. Her hand on the handle. I didn't need you to choose me over your family, she said quietly. I needed you to stand beside me as an equal. To defend my dignity. To see my worth even when I looked ordinary, she smiled slightly. You never did. The door closed behind her with a soft click. That small sound felt louder than any slam could have been. Min-jae stared at where she'd been standing. The ring still in his pocket, suddenly understanding what he'd lost. Not a poor girl who needed his family's acceptance, but a woman who had never needed any of them at all. Chairman Han was the first to speak. How long? His voice was barely above a whisper. How long has she been... that? Min-jae sank back into his chair. I don't know. We met at a charity event 18 months ago. She was volunteering, serving food. He laughed bitterly. I thought I was being generous, asking her out. I thought I was giving her a chance at a better life. Hyejin had gone pale. What did I say last night? What did I say about people from Incheon? No one answered her. They all remembered. Take a minute and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. You're going to want to see how this ends. Madame Han stood abruptly. Her chair fell backward with a crash. We need to fix this. Someone call her. Tell her we want to apologize. Tell her we'll make it right. Chairman Han looked at his wife like she'd lost her mind. Make it right? She owns us. She's owned us for 2 years, and we never knew. Do you think an apology will bring back 40% of our capital? He swept the documents off the table. They scattered across the floor like dead leaves. She played us. She played all of us. Min-jae shook his head slowly. No. We played ourselves. The news hit the financial networks by 3 p.m. Han Corporation faces major investor withdrawal. Stock prices plummet 15% in opening hours. By 5 p.m., it was trending on social media. Theories flew wildly. Some said the company was corrupt. Others claimed tax evasion. A few suggested internal family warfare. No one knew the real story, that a woman in a beige dress had been their salvation. And they'd treated her like dirt beneath their shoes. Min-jae sat alone in his office. His phone buzzed constantly. Friends asking what happened. Colleagues offering hollow sympathies. Business contacts suddenly unavailable. He ignored them all. He pulled up Ji-won's contact on his phone. His thumb hovered over the call button. What would he even say? I'm sorry? I didn't know? I should have defended you? All true. All worthless now. He scrolled through their message history instead. Photos of dinners they'd shared, her jokes that made him laugh, her questions about his day, her patience with his excuses. How many times had she asked to meet his family? How many times had he delayed? Making sure she was ready. Making sure they would accept her. When the real question was whether he was ready to stand with her. He typed a message. Can we talk? Stared at it for 5 minutes. Deleted it. Typed another. I'm sorry, I should have... Deleted it. Ji-won, please? Deleted it. What could words do now? She had given him every chance, every opportunity to choose her, and he'd chosen his comfort instead, his family's approval, his easy path. He set the phone down. She wouldn't answer anyway, and she shouldn't. Some failures couldn't be fixed with apologies. Some bridges, once burned, stayed burned. 3 days passed. The Han family tried everything. Chairman Han sent official letters requesting a meeting. All returned unopened. Madam Han attempted to visit Ji-won's office. Security turned her away at the lobby. Hyejin posted a public apology on social media. It was deleted within an hour. Their lawyers suggested legal action. But there was nothing illegal about withdrawing investments. Everything Ji-won had done was perfectly within her rights. Board members began jumping ship. 3 resigned in the first week. The company's valuation dropped 23%. Employees whispered in hallways, wondering if they should update their resumes. Min-jae returned to the estate one evening. His mother sat in the same sitting room where she'd humiliated Ji-won. The room that had seemed so powerful that night, now it just looked old. "Any word?" he asked. Madam Han shook her head. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. "Your father spoke to Park Industries today. They're pulling their partnership, said they can't be associated with instability." She laughed without humor. Instability. "That's what we are now." Min-jae sat across from her. "I loved her. I really did." His mother looked at him with something like pity. "I know. But love without courage is just cowardice with better marketing." 6 months later, Ji-won sat in her office on the 43rd floor of a gleaming building in Gangnam. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city where the Han estate perched on its hill. Smaller from this height, just one more piece of the vast urban landscape. Her phone buzzed, a message from her mother. "Proud of you, daughter. Your father would be too." Ji-won smiled and set the phone down. On her desk sat a framed photograph. Her parents on their wedding day, young and in love and poor as dirt. They'd built a good life anyway. They'd taught her that dignity didn't come from bank accounts. That worth wasn't measured in estates and family names. She'd almost forgotten. The Han family had recovered, more or less. The stock had dipped but eventually stabilized. They'd found new investors, though at worse terms. Restructured their debt, weathered the storm. Chairman Han had been forced into semi-retirement. The board demanded it. Madam Han no longer hosted charity galas. Her standing in society had taken a hit she'd never fully recover from. Hyejin had gone abroad to study, running from the whispers that followed the family name. And Min-jae, Ji-won's assistant, had mentioned he was dating someone from an appropriate family now, someone whose bloodline came pre-approved, whose resume needed no explanation. She hoped he'd be happy. She hoped he'd learn something. But mostly, she didn't think about him at all. A knock on her office door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in." Her assistant entered with a tablet. The Incheon Port Development Project just cleared final approval. Construction starts next month. Ji-won took the tablet, scrolling through the plans. Affordable housing where she'd grown up, community centers, job training facilities, creating opportunities for kids like she'd been. "Perfect," she said. "Schedule a press conference for next week. I want to be there when we break ground." Her assistant nodded and left. Ji-won stood and walked to the window, coffee in hand, watching the city move below her. Construction cranes dotted the skyline near the port. Her port now, her legacy. That evening, she attended a business dinner, the kind she used to avoid, where old money met new, where deals were made over wine that cost more than monthly rent. Several people approached her, congratulating her on the port project, asking about investment opportunities, treating her with the respect she'd always deserved, but had never received when she wore a beige dress and flat shoes. A woman in diamonds stopped her near the bar. "You're Seo Ji-won, aren't you? I heard about what happened with the Han family." She leaned in conspiratorially. "Between you and me, they had it coming." The way Madam Han treated people she considered beneath her. "Karma, I suppose." Ji-won smiled politely. "I don't believe in karma. I believe in choices. And consequences." The woman looked confused. Ji-won excused herself and moved toward the exit. She'd had enough of these gatherings for one evening. As she waited for her car, a familiar figure caught her eye. Min-jae. standing across the street, not attending the dinner, just standing there. Their eyes met through the glass doors. He looked older, tired. He raised his hand slightly, not quite a wave. More an acknowledgement. Ji-won nodded once. Then her car arrived and she left. Some chapters stayed closed. At home that night, Ji-won changed into comfortable clothes, made herself dinner in her kitchen, the same apartment she'd refused to give up, though she could afford a penthouse now, multiple penthouses. But this place had been hers when she had nothing. It had sheltered her the night she walked away. It deserved her loyalty more than any mansion ever would. She ate dinner on her couch, watching a drama she'd been meaning to finish. Her phone rang, an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello? Silence for a moment, then Min-jae's voice. I know I don't have the right to call. I should have hung up. Should have blocked the number. Should have maintained the boundary I'd set 6 months ago. But I'd spent 18 months loving this man. That didn't just disappear, even when it should. What do you want, Min-jae? My voice came out colder than I felt. I saw you tonight, he said, at the dinner. You looked happy. I didn't respond. I wanted to say. He paused, gathering courage he should have found 6 months ago. I wanted to say I understand now. Why you left. Why you had to test us. Why we failed. Is that all? I asked. No. His voice was quiet. I wanted to say you were right. About everything. I was a coward. I chose comfort over you. I chose their approval over your dignity. And I've had to live with that every day since. I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to say it was okay, to give him the absolution he was seeking. But it wasn't okay, and I wasn't responsible for his peace of mind. I hope you learned something, I said finally. For the next person. Goodbye, Min-jae. I hung up, set the phone down, and felt nothing but relief. Ji-won stood and walked to her window. The city stretched out before her, millions of lights, millions of stories. She was alone in this office, in this moment, but not lonely, because real wealth she'd finally understood wasn't the money she'd earned, wasn't the power she wielded, wasn't the empire she'd built. It was the moment she realized that love requiring her to shrink, to diminish, to hide who she was. That was never love at all. She had walked away from a man who wouldn't fight for her, from a family that saw her as less than, from a future that demanded she become smaller, and in walking away, she'd found something they never could have given her, herself. 6 months later became a year, then 2. The Incheon port development became a model for urban renewal. Ji-won's companies expanded, not because she craved more, but because she'd learned she was good at building things. Better at building than she'd ever been at shrinking. She dated occasionally, men who saw her as an equal, who weren't intimidated by her success, who understood that partnership meant standing beside, not behind. Her mother visited often, proud of the daughter who'd honored her father's memory by never forgetting where she came from. And sometimes, late at night, Ji-won would think about that dinner, that test, that moment she chose herself. And she'd smile, because she didn't leave because she was weak. She left because she finally knew her worth. If this story resonated with you, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and leave a comment telling us what you thought. These stories matter because you're here watching them. Stay connected with us for more stories that hit home. We'll see you in the next one.